All right, so now we are entering into our keynote session, which I have really been looking forward to. We're going to change hands now, and I'm going to invite Anne English to moderate this session. Anne English, please join me on the virtual Zoom stage here, or the Whova
I'm
stage,
here.
I should say.
There's an echo. I'm trying to figure something out.
All right, well, while you're figuring stuff out, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you and read your bio. So Anne English is a founding board member of My Dog is My Home. She believes strongly in the impact of storytelling for personal transformation and community change. She has been developing and leading innovative programs for over 2 decades in the Los Angeles homeless services sector for many of the largest providers of supportive housing. In 2008, while working as the Hollywood Area Director for People Assisting the Homeless, or PATH for short, and in partnership with Pause LA, she opened PATH Hollywood's Petco Place, the first formally sanctioned companion animal program within a homeless shelter in Los Angeles. So thank you for moderating, Anne. And I just want to check in to see if the tech issue has been resolved. There we go.
I have too many devices going. So
Yes, I understand your pain, and I also have too many devices going.
I'm trying to figure out how I can
Um,
manage this, how I can watch and also look at the tech and all that. But do I sound okay now?
You sound great to me. Everybody else, thumbs up? All right, cool. I got a thumbs up from Jillian. That means everything's great. All right, and so from here, I am going to hand things over to you.
Right. Okay, thanks so much, Christine. Sorry about that. It's really my pleasure to moderate this keynote. I've spent my entire career in homeless services, the better part of the last 30 years in LA County. And I think it's not a leap to say that there are almost no ideas that have transformed this industry like housing first. It's one of the most important concepts in this field, and it provides the roadmap to ultimately ending homelessness as we know it. Ultimately, this movement is to keep people experiencing homelessness with their animals and looking to a day when there's an end to homelessness, period, and an end to people's need to access homes. So it's with great honor that I introduce you all to Sam Tsemberis. Sam is a clinical community psychologist who originated the Housing First model based on the belief that housing is a human right. Housing First provides immediate access to housing and robust supports and treatment for people and their companion animals experiencing homelessness who are diagnosed with mental illness, addiction, or other health problems. Research reports that housing stability rates for Housing First programs are 80 to 90% compared to 35 to 45% for treatment as usual programs. Dr. Tsemberis serves as the CEO of the Pathways Housing First Institute. He's a clinical associate professor at the UCLA Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences, and he's published widely on these topics and received national and international recognition for this work. Currently, he's consulting with the state and county mental health programs in California and Los Angeles to improve services and ensure the legal rights for vulnerable populations. So welcome, Sam. It's really great to have you here, and we're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for that introduction. Very gracious. It's wonderful to be here. I'm still, feeling the vibrations of that wonderful singing experience. It was beautiful. So thank you for including that. And it's a great setting. Feel a lot calmer. So Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm honored to be here and present this talk about what Housing First is, and I've really tried to focus more on emphasizing, especially what it means for people with, companion animals, and why it's so important to have the inclusiveness and the rights to stay with your loved ones. And so I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to show and sort of walk through as I explain the program, and then I'm going to leave time for Q&A, and I encourage you, even as I'm speaking, to write questions into the chat that Anne will be monitoring them, and I'm happy to interrupt and answer your questions as we go along. It doesn't, try and make it as interactive as we can in this virtual world here. So. Are the slides showing okay? Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not sure that they're in, because we can see the slide and the next slide.
Okay, so maybe there's a different way of showing
You have-
the display.
Show the slideshow on your, it's fine.
No, hold on a sec. I can do it. I think it's the other option for displaying that How's that? Same way?
Same.
Okay, I'm just gonna go ahead. Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I want to say, just to start off, that when we first started this program, the Pathways Housing First program, that we presented all of our materials. We were kind of coming up with what is our agency identity, and when people read what the program was about, they came back with this. The heart and soul of this program is, of course, to address homelessness for people who have multiple issues. But at the heart and soul of it, the program is driven by love, respect, and the idea of creating possibilities for others. That's sort of the spiritual, emotional center of it. What I'm going to talk about is more technical and has to do with housing and services, but I want to just put that as the foundation of where we start. There are three components to the Housing First program. It's not different from a lot of permanent supportive housing programs. There's a housing component, of course, which is a permanent rent subsidy or a voucher or other kinds of ways to pay rent for apartments. Some of the programs are in single site buildings. The program I'm talking about consists primarily of apartments rented in the community, like everybody else, people living in integrated settings like everybody else, not in buildings that are special for people who are homeless or people with mental illness, just like apartments like you and I rent in the community. It's called scattered site model, but the voucher pays the rent permanently. The other component essential to the program are the support services, ongoing case management and support for as long as the person needs it. And the third component has to do with the program philosophy, which I will describe. It's person-centered and consumer-driven. And those are the three essential components. So there's one of the things about Housing First, perhaps many of you have heard the term. It's really kind of taken off as a policy issue, but it's widely used and often incorrectly applied. And so my hope is to kind of really get to the specifics of what it is really, because if you do it properly, as Anne said a second ago, you will expect results that are terrific. And if you're not doing it properly, but calling it that, then you're not going to get these results. And you're also going to have people saying, well, this thing, this Housing First doesn't work. It works if you do it properly, and my goal is to describe what doing it properly means. All right, so let me start with this about who the program serves and why. Because homelessness, we count homelessness every year in this country on the one night count, the point in time count. We know in 2023 there were 650,000 people on that one night across the country, which is a huge underestimate of the number of people that are actually homeless during the course of the year. And because we don't invest as a nation in sufficient support, housing, especially rents and affordable housing, we ration the available funding that we have through HUD by focusing primarily on this group here, about 10 to 20% of the entire homeless population, which is defined by the federal government as chronically homeless. You have to be homeless a long time. And then you qualify for special programs, especially if you're homeless for a long time and you have a disability. And so this is the group that gets a lot of attention. And that this is also the group that the Housing First program is targeting. There are many other kinds of programs, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and so on. Different, sometimes the same population, but different purpose, and it's a whole other conversation. This is about this group focusing on the chronically homeless. Okay, I just want to take a step back and talk about just the definition of homelessness and also the public perception of homelessness. The most commonly held assumptions about people who are homeless, especially the people we see on the street, are of an individual nature. Oh, this person must be homeless because they have a mental illness or because they have an addiction. And what our eyes are telling us and what we experience on the street then becomes an assumption about all homelessness. Now, you already know that the people we see on the street are actually only a fragment of who the homeless population is. So they're not representative of the whole homeless population, but in the public mind, they represent 100% of homelessness. And if the public is thinking of homelessness as people on the street, then the policymakers are thinking about homelessness as people on the street. And then we have a whole policy industry based on this fragment of the population. And we also see people are struggling with mental illness or addiction. So then we've moved to a service industry. There is like a homeless industrial complex that is based on these assumptions that people need treatment, they need sobriety, they need to get ready for housing because somehow it was the mental illness or addiction that got them there. You can see how people would jump to those conclusions, but who is homeless and who we see as homeless is different than why people become homeless. So in this country, we have, I would say, 3 different approaches to how we deal with homelessness. The medical model, which I just described, a kind of a housing readiness model. And that's the majority of the industry. That map there with the little dots on it and across the United States was something Dennis Culhane recently did a study. It says we're spending $10.7 billion on shelter services in this country every year. And approximately 50% of the shelter beds go empty every night. We have a medical model, treat the mental illness and addiction industry. We also have a charity model. There's lots of organizations carrying people, offering food, offering clothing, offering tents, offering all kinds of things to make the misery of homelessness a little bit more tolerable. But these industries also are not a solution to homelessness. They're kind of managing homelessness or treating homelessness. And then, of course, we have the enforcement model where, the police stepped up, move encampments, give people citations. We have also the, recently in the cities, like that picture of that bench, what we call hostile urban design, where it's making public space is uncomfortable for people to rest in, and so there's a medical approach, there's a, treat the people, there's a caring approach, there's an enforcement approach. There's also part of the medical approach, and we just passed this in California, it's popular also in New York, Proposition 1, there's an involuntary commitment approach, part of the medical, these people need treatment and are not getting it themselves. We're going to bring them in to court and mandate treatment. Approaches that have been around for quite a long time and not shown any effectiveness, but they do play in a popular way for the voting residents, people with housing. It's really a signal to voters that, this governor, Newsom, is doing something about homelessness. In fact, the proposition and the intervention is not based on research or anything effectiveness. It's, I would say, a political statement, which is going to hurt people because it's going to insist that they get treatment when they don't want it, and then they're going to avoid services even more because people actually need it, but that's not the way to engage them. So we have this group, the same group that I'm talking about, the 10 to 20% that end up either voluntarily or involuntarily in and out of jail, hospital, shelters, and back to the street. And that's the group that they keep trying the same system and it's not working for them. So we needed to figure out a different way of working with people other than insisting that they go up the stairs, try and go up the stairs one more time. Why do people become homeless, and why is it that so many seem to be, struggling with mental illness or addiction, at least on the visible street side? In a recent book by Greg Colburn and Clay Aldrin called "Homelessness is a Housing Problem," what you have here is a map of the United States, and the darker states show you the higher density of people who are homeless. Okay, so if homelessness was a mental illness problem or an addiction problem, there are states like Virginia and and Tennessee where the level of addiction is way higher than the rest of the country, but you don't see highest rates of homelessness in states that have the highest levels of addiction. And if it was mental illness, you would expect to see an even distribution because mental illness is distributed equally in the population. But you don't see that. You see this clustering of homelessness on the West Coast, everything from Seattle down to San Diego, and then Texas, and then the East Coast in Massachusetts and New York, Illinois there in the middle, Florida, Georgia coming up quickly. All of these states have something in common. Not only that they have the highest number of people who are homeless per capita, they also have the highest rents in the country. And so what Colburn finds when he's looking at the correlation between mental illness, addiction, and homelessness is that mental illness does not predict homelessness. Addiction does not predict homelessness because there's somewhere between 14 and 18 million people getting treatment for mental illness and addiction in this country, and most of them are living at home because they have money, they have a family, they have support services, they have insurance. So it's not about mental illness or addiction. But if you have mental illness and addiction and you don't have the supports and you're only on a disability income and you're living in a high rent state, you're not going to be able to get an apartment, put together the first month's rent security to get into housing. The only thing that predicts homelessness reliably is the price of rent and the proportion the person is paying for their rent. The higher the rent burden and the higher the rent, the more likely you are to be homeless. So that's why people get homeless. So, and the people that can't get back into the staircase, they have a few things in common. They try to stop using, they can't, or they don't agree that mental illness is a problem. They think that they can deal with mental illness, that they need a home, that they have animals that they don't want to separate from, companion animals that they care deeply about. Most shelters and housing programs are restrictive, even for couples, and so we needed a different approach, a different shift to addressing this problem. And I would say that the housing first approach delivered that because we were desperate to figure out something else. We were, it's not like when I started working this, I wasn't doing housing first. I was doing staircase, hoping to get people to treatment, hoping to get people to the hospital, But after a while, we needed a different approach. And what was the approach that was different? Fundamentally, we went from, I would say this is, in addition to love, respect, and creating possibilities, these are some of the foundations of what Housing First is about. We shifted from telling people what to do to asking them what they want. That was a big shift for us. Just because people seem tired or poor did not mean they don't have strong opinions and rights. We went from asking, the issue of also the people that were not being able to get in because of their companion animals was there right from the beginning. I mean, I remember one of the first people that we housed. She was on the street, and when she got an apartment, so thank God, she says, now I can go and get my cat. This woman, Rhonda, had a cat she loved, a lot, and she was paying her neighbor $65 a month to hold on to her cat because she didn't want her cat to be homeless. And so she was herself on the street and using her little bit of welfare money to pay the rent for her cat. And when she finally got an apartment, she was able to reunite with her cat. And so, not only moving, but it shows that, her compassion and care and like her ability. It's almost like, well, there's so many, sort of psychological things about the caring of the pet and the company and the companionship and also the care, the rituals of care for our animals and how they might translate to rituals of care for the self. And the other part of it too, I have to say, is that the way that people who are homeless and with their companion animals, that the sense of home becomes not geographic. It's not the apartment or the street. You are home when you are with your loved one, and it's independent of location, regardless of where you are. And your animal doesn't know your social status or your income or any of the human criteria people use to be nice or affectionate. It's like they're very democratic and truly accepting, and it can understand why people would not want to separate from their loved ones, and so it made no sense to even think about that as an option. I mean, people came and the program is driven by what it is that the person wants. I would say that another fundamental piece of it, besides not telling and listening, is that the program is designed flexibly because it is a program that doesn't look to change people to fit the program, like this slide says. It's a program that looks to change to fit the person, right? The person doesn't have to change to fit the program. The program has to change to fit the person. It has these fundamental principles of choice and separation. I'm going to say just a few words about each of them. I think another misunderstood thing about Housing First, because of the label, people associate it with housing, like, oh, you're going to go into Housing First. Housing First does not actually start with housing. It starts with the relationship with the person, so that your outreach worker starts to meet this person, meets their dog, gets to know them, and starts to ask them what it is that they want. This is so fundamental to the program because we call this a person-centered program, and it starts right from the street. It's like, we do not say, this is what we're going to do for you. And why it's so important is that it puts the person in the driver's seat right away. This is not a program, the underlying message is, this is not a program where you have to do things to get in. This is a program where you're in the lead. You're not complying here, you're leading here. What can we do for you? Now, it doesn't take much to figure out what the person is going to say. Mostly people say 90%, I want a place to live. Isn't it obvious? I want a place for me and my dog to live. We want to be safe, just decent and affordable. So it goes very quickly to housing, but it's important that we're not the ones saying, how about we give you a place to live? We say, what do you want? And the person says, this is what I want. Because once they're housed, the same question comes up again. What do you want now? And, that could be connecting with family, it could be work, it could be any number of things. But the important thing is it's a program that's driven by the person rather than having a set of rules that the person follows. We try as best we can, given the real estate market, to get a place that's consistent with location or type of studio, 1 bedroom, what neighborhoods. People come from different neighborhoods. Sometimes they want to go back to those neighborhoods. They have connections there. They have family there. And other times the last place they want to go back to is their old neighborhood because it was really difficult. So it's not arbitrary. And the reason we spend time talking about where people want to live is because if they're choosing it, that's going to be their home. It's not a placement. It's like they're creating their home space, including the furnishings and how they want to live, and of course who they want to live with, and also where they want to live, because then it's like a sense of ownership. This is my place. I chose this, So that's important. And then of course the service is essential to the success of the program. And by services, I want to be clear that I'm not talking, case management and mental health and addiction, although of course that's there. Services is really an attitude of like whatever it takes. Could be benefits, it could be finding a place to worship, it could be reconnection, it could be getting a vet because their animal needs care. It could be a creative, they want to join a singing group. It could be any number of things, but it's determined by the person, and the staff remains flexible enough. They're not saying, oh, this is not my job. I do case management. I don't do entitlements. You have to go to the office for that. No, I'll go with you. I'll help you. Do you need help? Do you want to do it online? I'll sit with you. Like it's a culture of acceptance and welcoming and helpfulness. If the person, and this happens, 20 or 30% of the time, people are not used to having a place. They've been homeless for a while. They have friends on the street. And when they get an apartment, their friends come over, and then they're staying over, and then they have a friend that comes over, and you have a lease violation and you get evicted. Other times people have a mental health issue and they start to feel very depressed or paranoid. They need to go to the hospital. Sometimes they get arrested. These kinds of disruptions that can happen do not result in termination from the program. This is a program that essentially has a no discharge policy, so that if you lose that apartment because whatever happened, remember the entry point is with the staff. So the staff person stays with you during those disruptions and will bring you home after the hospital, jail, or eviction. Look for another place. And what are we going to do better in the next place? So if you lose the housing, you don't lose the support. Those are separate, and they're very well coordinated. I just wanted to mention here that landlords and the relationship with landlords is huge, because without landlords agreeing to participate in a program like this, we have no program. So they are, they are the housing, and we pay attention to that by having one of the staff people essentially be the case manager for the landlords. Just like our clients need case management, our landlords need attention. They need someone to call. If there's an issue, the landlord knows they'll reach someone and they'll get help with that tenant. They're not left alone with the problem. It's their problem to solve. We want to make sure these landlords want to do business with us, want to rent to us the next time. And so that takes time, effort, and money, for indemnification of any damage and so on. They're important partners. One of the things that's absolutely essential in the understanding of the program between program and client is that, yes, this is housing, yes, this is on your terms, but we will visit. The home visit is not an option. I think in some of the policy stuff from HUD and other areas that say, well, because it's such a choice-driven program, the person can choose not to be in treatment. That's true. You don't have to be in treatment. You don't have to go to detox or take a drug test or go to see a psychiatrist, but you have to see us. We need to see you, that you're okay in this apartment and you're doing all right. And you can do the treatment on your own terms, but not having a home visit is not an option, not an option. And the tricky part is we're not putting the responsibility for the home visit on the client. You know, clients are like upset. They're not doing well. The responsibility for making the home visits happen is on the staff. We need to figure out a way to make sure these home visits can happen, which means we have to develop the kind of relationship where the person wants to see us, and not lock the door when they see us coming. So the responsibility for the home visit is ours, and it's mandatory. It's an artful balance, but essential. Most of the work, I've spent all this time talking about how to get housing, but most of the work actually takes place after the person is housed. Because the goal is not just housing stability, but recovery. How do we help a person get their life back? Is it employment? Is it, reconnection with family? And it's a long-term program, like homelessness can end just like that. You find a person a home, they're done. Homelessness is over. But they still are poor. They still have addiction issues. They still have health problems. Those things take a longer time. So the success outcomes of the program vary. The one that the program is best known for is housing stability, very quick, very stable over time. The others, we don't have a magic formula for, the other kind of conditions that we deal with, but that's the goal. The goal is to help the person do the best they can in terms of their recovery. And most of that, as I said, takes place through the home visit. And we carry the momentum. People maybe feel hopeless, or they feel like this is the best they can do, and we want to encourage and support that people can do better. This is not a program for people who are squeamish. It's a harm reduction program. You might be doing home visits. People are drinking or using, and you need to kind of be comfortable in that environment and talking to people. What are you using and why do you use? And a very trauma-informed approach to drug use, and trying to get to the root causes of why people start to use in the first place, rather than taking more of an abstinence model approach. And was that song about don't I have the right to be wrong? Don't I have the right to be wrong? It's like people make mistakes, and I think that one of the things about the program is not giving up on people and understanding the mistakes and learning from the mistakes like we all do, rather than looking to discharge or to end the relationship because of some kind of violation. Try and have as few rules as possible, because every rule you put in place, you're going to lose 10% of the people who can't meet that rule. So recovery in mental health is like, it's like recovery with anything else. Like I just finished reading the biography of, actually it's an autobiography of Judith Heumann, the woman who did the 504 special ed. Amazing story. She was born with polio and was in a wheelchair all her life. But it's like, she changed the world, she changed the world for accommodation to wheelchairs. It's like, so, you can have people who are struggling with use, or people struggling with mental health issues, or struggling with physical health issues, but that doesn't mean they can't have a life. And so recovery in mental health, and in the way we think about it in this rehabilitation program, is having a life over and above the diagnosis that you're given. It doesn't mean because you have a diagnosis, you can't do things, you can't have a life that is fulfilling and influence and connection. Peer support, huge part of the program. Always hire peers, staff, people know that experience. And I'll just go 2 or 3 slides about the outcomes, and then I'll stop. So that's the program. I hope I've explained it in some coherent way so you have a sense of what it is. If you do it well, you get great outcomes. We have a lot of research on this program, because it was so controversial to bring someone from the street with addiction, with mental illness, with their animals right into an apartment, no questions asked. We were very rigorous in doing randomized controlled trials, and 80% housing stability rate for Housing First versus 40 has been duplicated by a lot of different programs. The VA, for example, has the HUD-VASH program. Using Housing First, 92 cities have ended veterans' homelessness, this direct housing approach. The Canadians did a randomized controlled trial with 2,000 people across 5 cities. They came up with the same results, just sort of validating the fact that, when you do this program right, you can expect very, very good results. For the 10 to 20% it doesn't work, I think single site building with maybe someone at the door, because the most frequent reason that people can't manage an apartment of their own is not because they can't cook or manage, the sort of living in the apartment. They can't manage saying no to their friends. And so and then it becomes problematic, because friends need a place to stay, and then you're in a lease violation. And having one of these kinds of single site buildings where there's like someone at the door that knows who's coming in and going out, takes the pressure off the tenant. I think that's a good complement to people. I'll just end with this story. The man who's teaching this computer class here in the blue shirt, he's legally blind. I think he can see tones. He was in a psychiatric hospital, and he was desperate to get out. He's a brilliant computer scientist, and they would tell him no, and he would rage at the staff, like, I don't need this anymore. I'm fine. And they, of course, disagreed with him. And when he would get angry, they would say, oh, he's, explosive, or he's argumentative. You know how it works in institutions. You always lose. Anyway, we managed to persuade them to move out of the hospital. And he took the first apartment that we showed him. It was like a 3-floor walk-up in East Harlem. And it's like, Marco, yeah, maybe we can get you a ground floor, with your vision. I take this, I love this place. He walks around, he feels the place, got him a dog, that he loved, made his whole life possible. And in 2 months' time, he was in the program teaching a computer class, to the other tenants in the building. So it just goes to show you that, in one context, he's a argumentative and oppositional person. Another, he's like, a professor, teaching a class. So it's all about creating the conditions and the possibilities for people to thrive. Okay, so we have I'm going to stop there. I don't know exactly how to want to stop sharing here.
I think there should be a little share screen at the bottom, and you can hit the arrow and maybe say stop sharing.
Okay, let me see. There we go.
Yep. Great. Wow, that was
Okay.
just fantastic, Sam. I mean, it's always fantastic to hear you, but in this context, and after kind of a lot of the conversations we've been having for the last few days, it really kind of underscores for me how, I think I said this to you before, I really feel like this movement around companion animals, because it fits so neatly into the ideas of choice and dignity and, tenant-centered, that it is such a huge piece of this model. And there's like 1,000 questions. So
That's
I'm
wonderful.
yeah, it's wonderful. And I just am trying to sort of sort through what, as I'm sort of looking at them. Let me ask you a quick question. Can you sort of, what we're trying to do at My Dog Is My Home is thread this needle of siloing between animal welfare and, homeless services, right? And just thinking of, you have said it, but maybe speaking specifically to animal welfare organizations, why should they care about housing advocates? And why should, a homeless services care about animals? When they've, I mean, they often say, we have so much and so little, and we're having a session around turning around the mentality of scarcity. But beyond that, if you're talking to animal welfare organizations about caring about housing first, is there anything that you would say to them?
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the challenge is. I guess for me, the issue is when you not worrying about the program as much as worrying about the person,
Right.
And so if you start with that, if you're like thinking about what is the best thing for this person, and I mean, I live in an apartment building here with about 20 apartments, and I would say 5 of them, the landlord does not allow dogs. But if you have an emotional support dog, you're okay. You have to get it certified, which we had like there's a whole push around that. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
But I think that if you think of personal medicine, like that relationship is personal medicine for people, and so some people want to go and see a doctor or see a therapist, and other people need to have that relationship.
Yeah. I think
I
the
don't.
issue that comes up for animal welfare is, in a lot of ways, they often are leaning towards protecting the animal, right?
Uh-huh.
As opposed to caring about the person.
Right.
So our
Right.
whole thing is, if you
Well.
care about that animal, you have to care about the person, their family, and the person they're bonded to, right?
Well.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like family therapy.
Right.
You want to keep the family together. That's your best shot at a good outcome. And
Exactly
so,
right.
I mean, to care about the children, what are you going to do? Remove the children from the parents? That's going to be a disaster of foster care, to an unknown. At least here you have somebody, who cares and, is workable, maybe needs some assistance in figuring things out, but it has to be, it's a relationship. I
Right.
don't think it's of course, there are, just like there's room for involuntary commitment, there are grounds for abuse and separating. But
Sure.
most of these things are in this gray area where you need to figure out how to make the relationship as good as possible.
Right. Because that's the best outcome. So I have a question from Chastity, who I've actually spoken with, and I know she's in Missouri. My community wants to say we are following the housing first model, but we really have no understanding of it. Our community view our homeless as a nuisance. Our police are overworked because they get calls for disturbing the peace and trespassing. Although we have programs such as rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, we have very low landlord stock, not even a single shelter currently for single adults. How can my community implement housing first correctly without enough housing?
Well,
That's $1 million question.
yeah, I mean, it's more than 1 million. It's like several billion, I would say, because the housing shortage is all over the
Right.
country. But
Yep.
here's what I found, especially if you're like somewhere like in Missouri. I mean, you're not in Seattle, you're not in San Francisco, but even there, but especially in Missouri, because I'm actually working in Kansas quite a bit. The voucher programs are not a complete panacea, but we're talking about I'm not talking about ending all homelessness. I'm talking about this group of people that is going in and out, the chronic homeless. And that's a very small number in most communities. And I would say that if you can get the support services, together, and you can get the vouchers, finding the housing is not going to be your main problem. Your main problem is putting the housing resources and the support service resources together with that housing first philosophy, and then having somebody operate the program properly. But there are enough affordable units in any city, really, because it's a very small number. So both of those things can be true at the same time. Of course, we don't have enough affordable housing, for everybody, because it's not just the homeless are at the tip of the iceberg. There's lots of people living doubled up, sharing apartments because they can't afford the rent. It's like we have a huge crisis. This is the tip of the iceberg. But for this group of people, it's a very small number, and we can fix that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there is some thinking that that is an anchor. It is the most visible piece of the homelessness pie. And it is also, the most intractable, right? And it is sort of an anchor for everything else. And so I feel like, and obviously the people most in need.
Yeah, and also
Okay.
when you do that, it also opens up, shelter
Right.
capacity. It frees up
Mhm.
the police to do their actual work. It frees up
Right.
emergency rooms.
Yep.
It makes the whole system work better. And also, it's not just for the system. I mean, this thing about homelessness is always talked about like it's a problem for the person on the street. It's a problem for all of us. Who
Oh, yeah.
feels good? Who feels good walking by a person who's homeless? So it's like you have to own it, or like we all have to do something about it because it affects all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Question from Lena. It seems like you'd need a lot of individual workers to maintain that caseload, especially if clients are never really discharged. Okay, that's it. And can shift back to needing a lot of support. How can you sustain a program like this? I'm going to answer really quickly to this and then have you chime in, Sam. But we are having a discussion a little later in the day here, a bunch of us on the steering committee, around the scarcity mindset and understanding kind of what the availability is and how we think about things, how things are how we're put in a position of sort of thinking that there isn't enough for everyone, et cetera. Go ahead, Sam.
Well, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that you don't want to compromise the fidelity of the model with the spreading it too thin. So I think it's better to do it well for a few people than not that, and then rather than try and serve many and not do it well, then you're not really helping
Yeah.
anybody
And then
sufficiently. Yeah. But there was a little clip I saw in Davos, Davos, Switzerland, right, where all the like the G20 go, all the wealthiest people in the world go fly in with their private jets and talk about climate disaster and how they're going to contribute a little money. And there was this guy there who was saying, enough with philanthropy, raise taxes, raise taxes. And it's like, why are we quibbling about, are you going to have a shelter or a permanent housing or rapid rehousing? It's like, cut the fence,
yes.
like bring social services in. And it's like,
Right.
we're making value-based decisions. There's so much money, and we're left with like, crumbs to fight over.
Yep. And that's how it has been for so long in the nonprofit community and government, all that. So that's a lot of stuff that we're going to talk about. And I love hearing you say that. So Lena, definitely come to that session. Lena also said, I used to work for a Housing First program. Some of our people were housed with what were clearly slumlords. How do we get people housed in good housing where they can actually build a home when there aren't housing options to choose from? Well, that goes back. Yeah. Right.
Well, there is that thing. I mean, there is this desperation to find something that's affordable. But if you're doing it with HUD money, like when you have a voucher or some kind of a rent subsidy, these units at a minimum should pass the housing quality standards. The housing quality standards are there for a reason. You don't want to put someone in, there's no plumbing, or the electrical wiring is not safe, or the windows don't lock. It's like there are just some basics that you need, and you don't want to step below that and put people in it sort of sets up more problems for you rather than solving them. And also landlords need support. I mean, some landlords just can't afford to fix them. So when I was talking about the landlord relationship there, if you really are doing an ideal budget for a Housing First program, you'd want to put some money in for this kind of, sometimes houses, fail an inspection because the window lock is broken, for $12, like months so it's useful to have some capacity to help the landlord if the landlord is well-intentioned and not like gouging, to just
Sure.
get her over the line and get the thing fixed up. It's sometimes just easier.
Yeah. And when we were first doing scattered sites, 20 years ago in an agency I was working at, I mean, it was a huge deal for us to y- y- solicit landlords that we would tell them, listen, this person has a dedicated case manager, they're doing well, and we are going to check in and we are going to be there. And if you have a problem, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a good sell, right? I mean, that's
Yeah. Oh,
landlords
yeah.
like to hear that. Yes.
Yeah. This is from Carrie. I'm wondering about city community planning. I've been concerned that our community is pushing for providing tax incentives to developers to build more housing. Oh, comes back to that scarcity question. But the tax incentives to developers will remove funding that can go to support case management. So yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Come to
I mean,
the
I thought she was going to say something else, which was that there's a whole thing with zoning. A lot of cities are
yeah.
looking to protect the homeowners, and homeowners
Right,
don't
single
want
family
multiple dwelling buildings in their neighborhood. And then even if you have a developer who's willing to come in and build some affordable housing, you have the zoning restrictions that push you out. So,
Right.
it's multi-layered. I mean,
Yeah.
we've got homelessness for a reason. And by the way, we do lead the world in homelessness. I mean, the Western world, like
In Los
Europe,
Angeles.
Canada. And Los Angeles is the epicenter. We're the best at homelessness. We create more homelessness every day than we house.
Yep. So excited to say that. From Lauren, what role do you see public housing playing in solving the housing crisis?
I think public housing is the solution to the housing crisis. We stopped building public housing. We weren't doing it well. We had, it's a bit, in big chunks. And then it was like this whole racial discrimination. We didn't do a good job with public, but all of the other countries like Canada, Europe, when they look to end their homelessness, they're just upping the production of social housing or community housing or whatever you want to call it. We stopped building public housing in 1980. We were building 350,000 units a year, and we're 40 years missing that stock. And no one's talking about public housing. They're talking about vouchers. It's too socialist for this country. But without public housing, we're never getting out of this.
I agree. Yep.
So
it's just
public
about
housing
doing it
is
right.
huge. Yes.
Yep. It's just about doing it right. Boy, they just keep coming. This is from Jillian. What advice would you give to a voucher holder with complex post-traumatic stress disorder who knows they aren't getting the support they need from their housing team, but the housing team still penalizes them while claiming, still penalizes them for every mistake while claiming that they are trauma informed? Well,
it's bad practice.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer that without knowing the specifics.
Right.
I mean, but obviously this person is involved in some way. Sometimes the programs are set up like, I don't know, like their housing support people are sometimes like housing navigators, and they're more focused on kind of lease compliance issues rather than treatment. If somebody is like giving somebody a hard time, they're not trauma informed. I mean, trauma informed is about empathy and compassion.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much tension around, I feel, at least in Los Angeles, that we've had so much experience with what you were talking about, where housing first is really not understood and seen as housing only, really.
Yes.
And there's the support services are not in place, and people are not, actually experiencing housing first. And because these organizations call themselves housing first, people begin to sour on the idea of housing first because they don't understand what it is. And
that's right.
How do we, it's a tough nut to crack, but I just wonder how we ensure that housing first is implemented to fidelity. It's just, I don't know. It's a whole other conversation, but something that's come up for me quite a bit.
It comes up because there's also a very deliberate, purposeful attack on housing first now by
Yes.
sort of right-wing groups that
Right.
want to spend even less money than we're
Mhm.
getting, like these crumbs. They want to go back to shelter and congregate settings is what they're advocating for. They're saying housing
Right.
first in work. Let's just get people in shelters and get them cleaned
Right.
up and sober and get a job, and then they'll get housing.
Right.
Under
Right.
the Trump administration, they were saying housing fourth, very purposefully, alliteration, treatment, sobriety,
Right.
employment, and then housing.
Yeah.
And so it's not just and so there's a disservice by doing housing only because it feeds that
Right.
propaganda mill.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
I think what you're doing, like why I do these things, like try and explain and have more people understand what the model actually is probably our best inoculation to those misleading statements.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I worked for so many years with folks, that were in supportive housing, not as a provider, but as a, consultant, technical assistance provider through the Corporation for Supportive Housing, and feeling so much, even people that had been housed in permanent supportive housing. And obviously that's not a panacea. You get people in housing, they need services. It doesn't end their poverty. It doesn't end their struggles, right? And it just felt like people, and I think there's another question in here that addresses this as well. People very much feel like, well, there's only so much we can do. We don't have the resources. We can't, we're just putting people into housing regardless of their situation. It's just like harm reduction. Harm reduction, people say if they're practicing harm reduction, they just don't engage people and let them do whatever they want, which is not really what harm reduction is, So I think people are just don't understand necessarily all of the components, and could learn so much, and because it's been going on for so long, I feel like people need a refresher for sure, and some
There is
sort of, yes, go ahead.
there is a controversy on the harm reduction piece. I mean, I went
Mm.
to the Vancouver Insight
Uh-huh.
safe injection place,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm more like you. I'm like, harm reduction is also encouraging people to like do better, or like use
Right.
less or use something different. Like a sort of an active strategy, not judgmental, but like reducing the harm.
Right.
So I go to the safe injection site, and it's almost like a library with booths, like cubicles. You just have to give a name that you will remember when they call. You don't have to be a real name, no IDs, like very cool, very anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
People get clean works. They sit
Mm-hmm.
down at the cubicle, they shoot up, you wipe up, they can't loiter for more than 15 or 20 minutes. There's another lounge because it's a lot of use. And
Yeah.
then they leave. And I'm like, don't you want to like talk to this person? Like, I was like, so no, like, this is what we do. Like, it's clean needles. If they want to talk, we make ourselves available, but we don't intervene, So there is a range. There is a
Yeah.
range of how you interpret all that. But I think that's a legitimate debate,
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think it's legitimate to do that. Yeah. Because you're saving lives.
Well, yeah, it is totally that, and public health issues, and people are not getting, they're not stealing to get drugs, to get arrested. But even in the in the debate around what is best, ultimately we have to be informed also by the science. Like what is actually working. And I think that's where, for me, the housing first debate comes in. It's like, let's look at the evidence. We have evidence.
Right. Okay. From Tiffany, what is the most important piece of advice that you would give to people who work in the field of homelessness and are striving to follow the housing first model? Thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you, Tiffany. I mean, I think that striving is a good way of, I think of this practice kind of like yoga or any of these things that, like striving for the perfect asana, but it's like we're all imperfect in our own way. But I think if you are clear about the values and where you're coming from in terms of your approach and intentions. And I think, people make mistakes. You lose it with different clients. You make bad decisions. You have bad and good days. I mean, it's messy. But I think that the aspiration to do it well is what keeps us going.
Awesome. Yes, agreed. From Aileen, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. In your opinion, is local advocacy better than federal? And what are your thoughts on land trusts and segregation in the current housing system?
Wow. It's a huge, I don't know,
Yeah,
I would say that advocacy on the level that is most effective, wherever you think you can get the furthest with your time and energy and resources is the best place to do it. Because there are different levels of effective advocacy. For example, one of the things I'm observing around the country these days is that the mayor has an enormous ability to influence homeless policy. They may not have all of the resources like they do at the federal government, but the resources that are there can all be pointed in one direction, or services can be coordinated in a particular way. So advocacy at the local level can make a huge difference. And of course, advocacy at the federal level in terms of, getting more, we were talking about public housing, for example, I would, I'd love to see more of that. So it depends on where the advocacy is. I don't know enough about land trusts to comment on it, although it sounds like a great thing to do, of course.
yeah. There's several in Los Angeles that are happening that are having some success. So it's wonderful, but very small, obviously, very small piece of the work. From Gabe, hello from Nashville, where you spoke to our COC earlier this month. Could you talk about could you talk about identifying a central organization to coordinate this work in a community?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think in Nashville, I was encouraging the city to do it, to tell you the truth, because I think, we were talking earlier about the mayor's office, because if you have a local nonprofit doing it, there's a kind of just part of the turf of nonprofit life is that people compete with each other, and it's like, why this one and why not this one, like that. So I think like a housing authority or the mayor's office, some authority that is like outside of the competitive grant seeking scheme of nonprofit world is a better way to coordinate that initial program. And that's how it's worked really well in Milwaukee. That's how it's worked in Houston. Well, actually, Houston, the mayor led it, but the Coalition for the Homeless in Houston is the main housing first program. So there's an interesting mix of there. I guess it was acceptable enough to the community. There was a community consensus about it. So obviously there's a number of ways to do it, but I guess my go-to and what I've seen most effective and what I definitely recommend for Nashville, and you could bring that message back there, Gabe, is like the city should take the reins and start a housing first program, because they're hoping that the other providers will do it. It's hard to influence another provider at arm's length. You have to do it yourself to demonstrate how it works.
Awesome. I think maybe I have time for one more question. Is that right? Somebody can jump in and tell me I'm wrong if that's true.
That's right. One more.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I would love to have this conversation like forever. It's wonderful, and obviously there's a lot of interest. What steps can outreach workers take to establish trust with those who might prefer staying in encampments as opposed to a shelter setting? Well, I understand the shelter setting, but yeah.
Well, I think who wouldn't want to stay in an encampment as opposed to a shelter, especially if you can have your stuff with you, it's like you got to let everything go to a shelter. Shelters, like I said, 50% of them remain empty, even though we're spending a lot of money on them. And you know, and the terrible thing that happens there is that someone else will come along and say, oh, you see, we offered them to go in and they don't want to go inside. They don't want housing. It's like a shelter is not housing. If you
Right.
offered that same person a place of their own, you know, safe and secure and affordable, they would leave that encampment, you know, very quickly. So it's not that people are resistant to shelters or resistant to treatment. They just have a different idea of what it is that they want. And it doesn't mean that that's resistance. It means it's different than our idea, you know? And that
Yep.
takes us back to the beginning. Like, what is housing first? It wasn't my idea. It was the person on the street's idea.
Right.
And that's why
Right.
that's why it worked.
Yeah.
And
Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank
This
you.
is-
Thanks for inviting me, and thank you for moderating this. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and thank you for all your questions and everyone for attending. Christine,
Okay.
thank you. Bye.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank you both for bringing this conversation to us today. And Dr. Tsemberis, you don't know how meaningful your work is to this organization. We got our start because of experiences that we had in a Housing First program and the dissonance caused by the Housing First philosophy rubbing up against the No Pets Allowed rule. So thank you for being a voice in this conversation. Thank you for being with us here today. And all of those questions that you got, they came from people in both animal welfare and housing. So like, obviously, you have ignited something in this community. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Enjoy the rest.
Okay.
And now we will be moving into our first break of the day. This is a 15-minute stretch break. So everyone, please return by 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time, USA, for our storytelling session with Amanda Richer. Enjoy your break, everyone.